You know, listening to podcasts is awfully like drinking a pint. Having one is fine, but it's more fun to have a second. Hi, this is Andrew from the podcast Pop Culture Brews, and you are listening to Homebrewing DIY. After this episode, why don't you come and join me and my co-host Tyler as we do deep dives on pieces of pop culture we absolutely love, and then at the end of our episodes, we reveal to you the beer we were inspired to brew by it. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, anywhere really where you get your podcasts. So why don't you come and join us and have a pint?
Personally, I tend to not brew a lot of big beers. I think the main reason for me is that I don't like to bottle, and having a 12% Russian Imperial Stout on tap would take me forever to get through. But Ryan Pachmayer is a home brewer that has found a love for big beers, and he's really good at brewing them. So we're going to talk to him today about brewing big beers on Homebrewing DIY.
Keeping a clean brewery is the key to making great beer that doesn't get contaminated. Do you use a glass or plastic carboy for your fermentation? Did you know that getting your carboy clean can be tough, especially removing the crucian ring? Even with traditional carboy cleaning tools, it can take a lot of time and not get your carboy completely clean. Well, today there's a new tool that can easily clean your carboy and do it fast, and that tool is called a scrubber ducky. Scrubber duckies are a new magnetic carboy cleaner that are easy to use and get the cleaning results required in brewing. Drop a magnetic scrubber into your carboy and be able to scrub away all of the grime and that hard to clean crucian. They are no match for scrubber duckies, and you can get yours today at scrubberduckies.com. Once again, head over to scrubberduckies.com. Building recipes and taking good notes are two of the key fundamentals of making great beer. This is one of the first things that you learn when becoming a new brewer. I started taking notes on a sheet from my extract kit and then quickly moved to brewing software. I've tried many different types of brewing software, and then I found Brewfather. This is the one piece of software that you need for recipes and very detailed brew day notes, as well as fermentation notes. Brewfather also integrates with some of the topics that we discuss on this show, like the till hydrometer, the ice spindle, and ferment track. You need no other piece of software than Brewfather. One of the best parts of Brewfather is that you can try it for free. All you need to do is head to our website, homebrewingdiy.beer, and click on the Brewfather banner to sign up for free today. Once again, that's homebrewingdiy.beer and sign up for Brewfather today. Have you ever wanted to make a podcast? Do you have a subject you want to discuss with listeners? Do you even know where to start? Well, if you want to make a podcast and you want to get started now, I could not recommend Anchor enough. Anchor is the easiest way to make a podcast. Anchor gives you everything you need in one place for free, which you can use right from your phone or computer. Creation tools allow you to record and edit your podcast so it sounds great. They'll distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard everywhere: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and many more. And you can easily make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. Hey, look, I shopped around for a place to post my podcast, and Anchor was the easiest, most streamlined experience you could ask for. So if you're looking for a place for your new podcast, download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Once again, download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
And welcome back to Homebrewing DIY, the show that takes on the do-it-yourself aspect of homebrewing. Gadgets, contraptions, and parts. This podcast covers it all. Today, we're talking with Ryan Pachmayer. He's a very avid brewer of big beers, and he's really good at making them, so we're going to go through his history, how he learned how to homebrew, and some tips and tricks on making really great big beers. But first, I'd like to thank all of our patrons over at Patreon. Your support is what helps to keep this show coming to you week after week. I also want to thank Clay. He's one of our sustaining Patreon supporters, and he actually came up to one of our homebrew clubs this week and spent time with everybody that I drink a lot of beer with and had a really great time. So Clay, thanks for coming up. And once again, also Clay, thank you very much for your support. You can support the show by heading over to patreon.com/homebrewing DIY. Any amount helps, and it helps keep this show coming to you week after week. Another way to help is you can always review us. You can review us on Apple, podchaser.com, or Stitcher. Head over to your favorite podcast app. If they'll let you write us a review, do it. It helps other people find this show. The last way you can help support the show is to head over to homebrewingdiy.beer. There you'll find banners from our sponsors, Brewfather and Adventures in Homebrewing. Click on those banners and it lets them know that we sent you and they support the show in turn. You can also find the show on social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Just look for the handle @homebrewingdiy, all one word. Now let's dive into a bit about my brewing experiences this week. I finally got the chance to keg the 20 gallons of beer that I made with my boss at work, and it was a good time. He came over, he brought a couple kegs, and we set up shop in my kitchen, and we sat around and kegged some beers. Well, one of the cool things was that when we were doing the brewing and I had to get set up, we had a problem with one of his carboys, and it's kind of funny, he couldn't find a bung to go into the top. So I had to bust out one of my old carboys to use because I did have the ability to do that. Well, as we got the beer out of the carboy, I actually busted out one of my scrubber duckies that I got from our fine sponsor, and I actually used it on my carboy. And I have to say that I am not joking around. I'm very, very pleasantly surprised with the quality of the cleaning I got with my scrubber duckies. It was something that I'm a little blown away. It worked really well. I had zero issues. The magnets were super strong, and it busted through a really, really thick, beefy cruisin on this carboy. Funny thing about that is that carboy, because we had so little headspace, I didn't put a blow-off tube, and I should always know better to use a blow-off tube because, of course, the one time I don't, it decides to explode. I got yeast all over the ceiling of my basement, and I have to say this 20-gallon batch has been really nothing but problems. I melted my fermenter. I had a blow-off that hit the roof of my basement. I'm actually kind of glad these beers are done. But had a glass of my red ale just yesterday. Tasted great. And so in the end, I think it was worth it. Well, let's dive into our show today. We're going to talk to Ryan Pachmayer, and we're going to dive into big beers. I'd like to welcome Ryan to the show. Let's just jump right into our first question, Ryan. When did you start homebrewing?
So I started brewing about 14 years ago with my friend Clay back in Chicago. We really got into brewing because we wanted to brew stouts, and they weren't super accessible back then. Regular stuff on the shelf that we would drink would be like the Lion Stout, Rogue's Shakespeare Stout, Beamish, Young's Double Chocolate Stout, stuff like that. Every once in a while, the two closest breweries to our homes were Flossmoor Station and Three Floyds. Every once in a while, they would have like an Imperial Stout release that we really, really enjoyed. But it wasn't like it is today. It was few and far between, especially around where we lived. So we decided to get into brewing because we wanted to brew some of those beers, and also because we kind of wanted to experiment and do different things that we didn't regularly get to see. Our early stouts were not great. We did not have temperature control, so they were a little too estery. I mean, we drank them, and I'd say most of them came out fine. They didn't get infected, but they weren't as clean as the commercial examples that we really enjoyed. When you ferment in 70, 75 degrees, it's a lot harder to get a really clean profile and allow the chocolate and roasted and coffee, all that sort of flavor in a stout shine. So we struggled a little bit early on. The homebrew shop closest to us was about 30 minutes away. Did not help either. We were newbies, didn't know that much, but looking back at one of the early recipes we made, they had about 10 malts at this homebrew shop. It was like a wine, more of a wine-focused shop. And anytime we came with a recipe, they'd have to sub something. And they didn't do phone orders. So you'd come in with, your recipe, and one time they subbed, I think we wanted Maris Otter, or it was either Maris Otter or Golden Promise, and it was just an English stout recipe that we had, and they subbed it for Crystal. So our beer came out to, I think, 2% alcohol. It was probably, Munich or amber malt that gave it the little bit of alcohol that it had. But I remember back then we were so frustrated because we didn't know what happened, but you live and learn. Early books that kind of inspired us were Randy Mosier's Radical Brewing, for sure. Jamil's clone book, John Palmer's How to Brew. But Radical Brewing was really the focal point for experiments with us. We really like to experiment, even before we were, good enough to experiment, I'd say, successfully all the time. We do a bunch of pepper beers, Earl Grey, tea beers, coffee beers. We even did a couple of weed marijuana beers early on as well. But it was stouts that really got us in there.
Yeah, that's one of the cool things about living in Colorado is you could totally knock out a weed beer and not get in trouble unless you're a commercial brewery, because then that's federally illegal. Just kind of one of those weird things. My next question, though, is why big beers? You tend to make a lot of them. Why'd you get into that?
So, yeah, I guess I'm kind of known as one of the big beer brewer type people at the beer club. It's really a few things. Number one, I just really like big beers, stouts, Belgians, barley wines. I really like the flavor profile of those beers. It's really nice to just sit there with a snifter and sip and smell those big beers slowly for a few hours. I really enjoy it. Second thing is, I do brew plenty of lower alcohol beers, but I just don't usually bring them to the beer club because I don't usually bottle them, and it's difficult, at least in my experience, to take a low alcohol beer and put it in a little glass container or something off the tap and bring it in and have it really be the same kind of beer that it is if you take it off tap at your house or if it is at a bar. They're kind of delicate in my opinion. So if I'm not bottling, a lower IPA or a lager or something like that, I'm usually not bringing it into the beer club, just because I'd rather people drink the beer at its best and not sacrifice the quality. So I usually bring my bottled beers, which are usually the biggest beers that I brew. But I do brew a lot of big beers, and the reason why I brew a lot of big beers is, it's cost efficient compared to, you're talking about $20 bottles of barrel-aged Imperial Stout that you're buying at the store, or if you really want something sought after on the secondary market, it could be hundreds of dollars, and I don't really want to spend that money regularly. I'll spend $20 on a bottle of beer. I've spent more before, but I like to make all sorts of different big beers, and it's much nicer to collaborate with people and split 5 gallons. Take 2.5 for yourself. You can drink a gallon or 2 in the first year. You can save a couple bottles for aging. You're not going to feel like crap if you drink it 4 years later and, oh no, the last 4 bottles are past their peak. You didn't just spend $80 on those 4 bottles. So cost definitely comes into that.
When you started brewing, how did you start with your equipment set up, and what does your equipment look like today?
So I started with just a stovetop pot and cooler. It was always all grain. We never did extract when I started. We read in, one of the books probably the Palmer book, if I recall. that all grain gave you a lot more control over recipes. And, we didn't really know what that meant, but it sounded good to us. So we ended up starting with a pot and a cooler and all grain. In hindsight, we probably should have started extract just to learn the basics more. But, you get excited when you get into things and you just kind of jump in. From there, we graduated to kind of a classic three-tier keg system, converted kegs, just gravity from the liquor tank to the mash tun, and then into the boil kettle, and then into the fermenter. Nowadays, I have a robo brew. I love it for convenience, but I brew with a lot of different people, and I use a lot of their systems as well. So the robo brew is nice because we can use it as a supplementary system. If I'm brewing with a friend, we can brew a second or third beer over there. I can bring it places very easily. I can brew indoors in the winter. Very convenient. And then if I just want to brew on my own, I can do that as well in the comfort of my own home. And the robo brew, it's pretty simple. I've had a mash and boil before. I've borrowed a grain father from a friend for a long time while he's out of the country. Any of those systems, I think, are definitely good systems that I would recommend.
When you're fermenting, what kind of equipment are you using there?
As far as fermenting, I mostly use stainless steel. I've got some of the lower end Anvil old models, SS Brewtech. I don't spend a ton of money on that stuff. Some of them are Christmas gifts. Some of them I just buy when they go on that super clearance. Black Friday is the great time. Homebrewfinds.com has the best deals around the web. It's probably the best time to buy things on average. I have a drop freezer. It can house 2 fermentation vessels at once, or multiple kegs if I was doing some sort of keg storage, like long-term lagering storage. So I have a temp control on there, controls fermentation. I have a 7-tap beer system I just put together. So it's an old bar fridge, the kind of fridge unit you'd see at a bar. It has a compartment on the left side that you can store bottles in, and then it can hold about 7 kegs, 1 tank, and then it has a hole going to the outside where you can have another CO2 tank. So it's got plenty of stuff. My uncle helped me build the tap system, and so did my friend Adam Drager, professional brewer. He's a very, very good engineer and just an all-around builder of things. So he gave me a lot of technical advice because I'd never built a tap system, and my uncle did some welding and helped me put together some of the intricate pieces. 7's a lot, but since the system, I'd had the bar fridge for a decade, and it could hold that much, and I could toss some carbonated water or kombucha on as well. I don't have to have 7 beer taps, so I figured why not go max capacity on it.
Well, you talk a lot about doing collaboration with friends and people in the club. Why don't you talk about how you collaborate with others?
Yeah, I do collaborate with a lot of other homebrewers. I'm in 2 beer clubs, Croc, Keg Ran Out Club. It's a long-standing north side of Denver metro area club. I think it's 20 plus years now, probably 24, 25 years they've been around. And then I'm also a member of the Mash Paddlers, obviously with you. That's a 5 or 6 or 7-year-old club. So I meet a lot of brewers in those clubs, and just from conversation, we find, we might want to brew the same type of beer. Last year, Andrew Voss, who I brew with sometimes as well, he hosted a big brew day for our club, and Evan from the podcast and from the club, we decided to make a mushroom beer, a brown ale, a light English brown ale with some morel and oyster mushrooms that I'd foraged. Evan's into foraging mushrooms. I'm into foraging mushrooms. We're both like light English beers, especially brown ales, and so we paired the 2. It came out great. But that's just an example of the kind of collaboration that it really interests me. I like finding people with common interests and collaborating. It's a little more fun on the brew day, and it's just fun to try to achieve something like that. Probably over the half the beers I make are with my friend Nathan, and we both like big beers. We make a lot of big beers together. We like all styles, so it's usually us just exchanging a few emails and saying, hey, what do you think about these 8 beers? And then we pick 1 or 2 for the next brew day. And that's really nice because we split 5-gallon batches. And I really love trying new beers. I really love tweaking old beers. And if you're brewing the same beer over and over and you're brewing 10 gallons of it, you don't have the opportunity to change things that often because it takes you a while to go through 10 gallons. So we just make 5-gallon batches. We split it. We each have 2.5. And you can get through 2.5 gallons yourself, some friends. It's very easy to get through it. So we're brewing a lot. It's really appealing. The recipe formulation part is really appealing to me. I really like designing new recipes, drinking the beer afterwards, taking notes, bringing it to other people whose palates I respect, finding out what they think, and just digging into it and then improving it the next time. There was an article on beer and brewing recently from Drew Beecham about the Avec, the Best Wishes beer from DuPont. It's their strong super saison, their winter saison. It's always been one of my favorite beers. I know Nathan loves it, and we've been trying to clone it 3 times now, and it was fun to read Drew Beecham talk about his struggles in cloning that beer, because I think we've ended up with a pretty good beer the 3rd time, but it's still not. I shouldn't say clone. We're trying to make something in the same spirit of it, but it's very difficult. But these are the things that you can attempt when you're brewing 2.5 gallons. You're getting 2.5 gallons out of each batch. You can just brew, learn more things, try new beers. It's a lot of fun. I much prefer it. I understand and I appreciate and respect the people that make 10, 20-gallon batches. They know what they want. They put it in their keg. They have it on tap. That's their purpose. But for me, I really like the recipe formulation, the experimentation, the tweaking, the trying new things. It's all that's what really drives me these days.
I think when we talk about brewing the types of beers that you do, I think malt's a very important factor in that. How do you choose your malts, and what kind of malts are you using?
So my favorite malts, I guess we start with base malts. I use two-row a lot, but my favorite malts would probably be Pilsner-wise. I really like the Best Heidelberg Pilsner. It's a lighter Pilsner malt. It's slightly lighter than their regular Best Malts Pilsner. I like that a lot. The Weyermann Bark Pilsner is really cool. I've always liked Maris Otter and Golden Promise. We've had some good luck with Pearl Malt as well. I've really liked Pearl Malt. We started buying it for a Heady Topper clone years ago, and we've used it in barley wines and several other beers, and we've just really liked the character of the Pearl Malt. So those are probably my favorite base malts. In the stouts, I really like the different chocolate malts. I like adding 3 or 4 different chocolate malts a lot of times for complexity in the stouts. And then sometimes I really like using Carafa instead of like black malt. You get a lot less astringency in the beer. When I first started making stouts over a decade ago, I'd use black malt, the classic stout recipes, and too much black malt. I much prefer the Carafa in those beers. I don't know. Those are probably my favorite malts in general. Brand-wise, I really like Weyermann, Simpson's, Crisp, Thomas Fawcett. Those are all good. But there's not really... I don't think there's a brand I really hate. I try to use appropriate malts for the style I'm brewing for the most part. So in an English barley wine, I'm not going to use like a Brice crystal malt. I'm usually using a Simpson's crystal. Actually, I have a bunch of Simpson's crystals, so I usually use that, and I really like the flavor of Simpson's in particular. I'm really excited to try some of the local maltsters, though. There's at least 3 or 4 local small maltsters in Colorado. I've heard everything from this is the greatest malt ever from people that use it to I didn't like it at all, so I would like to experiment with it at some point. I'd really like to try that Mecca grade malt that everyone up in the Northwest talks about. I think they're like outside of Bend. I've heard brewers I know up there talk about it. I've heard homebrewers. It's got a great reputation for being pretty high quality malt. So next time I make it up there, hopefully I'll be driving and I can pick up a sack or 2 and bring it back and play around with it. But it's really neat. I forgot the website. I saw it at HomebrewCon a few years ago, but there's a website with all the local maltsters in the country, and it's really popped up sort of similar to the way that hops have grown in just many different qualities you can buy from many different places in the last like 5 or 10 years. I remember Simcoe used to be like a rare hop. Now there's like, you know, a really good homebrew shop could have over 100 different hops, which is cool. And now you're starting to see different maltsters. So I'm really curious and interested to try the different maltsters. They're all over the U.S., you know, dozens and dozens of them. And it would be neat to really explore that the way that I've kind of explored hops over the last 5 or 10 years, and many people have.
Well, since we talked about malts, what kind of yeast are you using?
Yeast-wise, USO5 is probably the yeast strain I use most frequently. Our Croc Club has a dry yeast bank, so we buy dry yeast in bulk, and then the club pays for that with the money in the club finances, and then the brewers just pay it at cost, and that reimburses, and then we buy more dry yeast when we run out. So we have all sorts of dry yeast, and I love dry yeast. It's very reliable and high quality these days. But USO5 is probably the thing I use most. Use that for big stouts. Use it for plenty of IPAs and lighter American beers. You can even make pseudo lagers with it by fermenting it lower, and because it's pretty clean. Fake lagers, I should say. But for actual lagers, 3470 is what I use the most. The Westefano yeast. It's clean, it works, it's reliable, it's nice. I really love the DuPont, as I mentioned before. DuPont, their strain is amazing, their Saison strain. So I love that. I haven't had problems with it like some people have reported it getting stuck, but I think I just ferment it pretty high. You can ferment it. I mean, I fermented it in the 90s before. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that, but I've read that DuPont goes in the 80s and 90s. But I think mid to upper 70s is perfectly fine with that yeast. It throws off so many cool flavors, that one. I also use WLP 099, super high gravity. I like that for super huge stouts. Our 20% stout that I've made. I've won a few awards of different 20% stouts, and WLP 099 has always been used for those. Either as the primary stout or, one method is to use USO5, make a 13% stout, or a beer that you think will go to about 13%. And then on like day 2 of fermentation, you just pitch a massive pitch of WLP 099, the super high gravity, and you start feeding the beer DME and sugar. DME because it leaves a little more residual sugar for body, unfermentable sugar. So you're not drying the beer out completely. So on the one big stout that we placed pretty well on, we made a 13% stout, USO5, big pitch of that, and I think between day 2 and day 3, a massive pitch of 099, and then about 2% ABV potential worth of DME and sugar staggered in 4 different additions. So it went DME, wait a couple days, sugar, wait a couple days, sugar, wait a few more days, and then DME again. And we got, about 20% alcohol, maybe slightly north of 20%. I've seen breweries get to 21, maybe a little higher, 22 with that strain. We don't have a yeast lab, and we're not winging it, but we don't have the control that a brewery has or the experience. So we've gotten to around 20, maybe slightly north, and it creates a really cool, super big stout that kind of drinks like a port in some ways. The first time we made it, we almost dumped it after 6 months. We honestly were probably just lazy. That's why we didn't. And we just let it sit there. And after a year, it was slightly drinkable. Again, probably would have dumped it if we weren't lazy. And a year and a half or 2 years, it's like, oh, wow, this is starting to taste kind of good. After 3 years, really felt it was divine, entered it into Big Beers competition, I believe it was. Yeah, Big Beers up in Breckenridge, and it scored like a 46 and a 50 from 2 professional brewers that were judges. So it was really neat. Definitely the highest score I've gotten on a beer. So with those big beers, you got to be patient. But it's a really neat way to make something that honestly is hard to find on the shelf. Black Tuesday is one of the most popular 20% beers that's made a very similar way. But people don't generally make those kind of beers and release those kind of beers regularly. So it's pretty cool to make a batch of that every once in a while.
Yeah. Speaking of like big beer techniques, do you have any really cool tips on brewing big beers?
So tips for making big beers. First of all, pick a reliable recipe. I would just suggest finding something reliable online. Find a beer that you like, maybe even ideally a beer that you can get. If you like Belgians, if you like Chimay Blue, you can buy Chimay Blue at the store. There's a good similar, not direct clone, but a very similar recipe to Chimay Blue, which is a great Belgian dark strong. Online, you can find that recipe. Same with stouts. You find a stout recipe like, or an English barley wine, whatever big beer you're making. Find something you can get, I would say, so that you can compare afterwards. If you really want to experiment and you want to get something that is not available in the market, that's fine. But I would try to find a reliable recipe online before you go about making a recipe from scratch. It's hard to understand all the components. I certainly don't understand all the components that go into what if you use this crystal malt versus this crystal malt, a darker one versus a lighter one, or, amber malt versus, pale malt versus Maris Otter, there's a lot of things that you can consider, hop combinations and all sorts of things. So I think you should do yourself your favor, get yourself a head start and take a reliable clone recipe you can find online, and go for there for your first big beer. The really big thing is to pitch enough yeast. Whenever there's a problem, it's quite frequently not pitching enough yeast. So use a reliable calculator. Brewer's Friend is usually what I use. I know Beersmith has a calculator, but I found Beersmith's calculator can undersell the amount of yeast you really, really should use at times. So at least on the dry yeast side. But use a reliable calculator such as Brewer's Friend. You can use it for liquid or dry yeast. You can't really overpitch at the homebrew scale within reason. So err on the side of too much yeast. If it says, you need 600 billion cells, don't pitch 500, target 700. Make sure your yeast package is fresh. If it's a few months old, make sure you put that information in the calculator, so you know how many viable yeast cells you have. If you have a liquid package that's 6 months old, it probably doesn't have 100 billion yeast cells anymore. It's going to be less than that. So make sure you do that. Use the yeast calculator. If you have to make a multi-step starter for liquid yeast, it's perfectly fine. Go ahead and do that. Or you can buy, bricks of dry yeast in bulk to save money. But pitch enough yeast. It's very, very important. Oxygen is pretty important on big beers. Hit the wort with some oxygen after you've crashed, and you put it in the fermenter and you pitch in the yeast there. Make sure you have oxygenated wort to pitch that yeast into. And if it's a really big beer, you can also hit it with some yeast after about 18 hours. It's a tip I picked up from that yeast book from Chris White and Jamil. After about 18 hours, you hit it with a second little blast of oxygen after the yeast cells have multiplied, just to really give them a little more energy. Fermentation control is the other big thing that you see problems with when you have big problems with beers. It's yeast and fermentation control, sometimes both. I hear it all the time. People will say, my basement's 65 degrees, therefore I just put the beer in my primary, pitch the yeast, and my beer's fermenting at 65. With a light beer, you can sometimes get away with that. 65 externally is really, during peak fermentation, could be 68 or 69 or 70. And yeah, sure, your ale will probably be just fine at 68, 70 degrees. Not as clean as if it was at 65, but internal temperature that high, you're probably going to be okay. But when you're making a big beer, the internal temperature, the fermentation could be more vigorous. You're pitching enough yeast. It could be 10 degrees or more. In order to keep a beer at 67 degrees, I've had my ambient temperature of my fermentation fridge in the mid to upper 50s before. So just because your basement's 65 doesn't mean you can ferment a beer at the right temperature. If you make a stout at 65 degree ambient in your basement, day 3, peak fermentation, it's going vigorously. If you actually check the internal temperature of your beer, it's probably 75 plus degrees at that point. And at 75 degrees in a stout, you're going to get a lot of fruity esters, and it's not going to be a clean stout. It's going to get in the way of all the good flavors that you want in a stout. And same for any of the styles, except for Belgian beers. Any big beer probably isn't going to benefit from. It's probably going to detract quite a bit if you're fermenting over 70 degrees in the internal temperature. Another thing is, even if, say, your basement's 58, and you say, great, cool, so during peak fermentation, my beer will be 65, 68 degrees. That's perfect. It's a good temperature for a lot of big beers. The problem is, after a few days, the peak fermentation, it settles down, it's not as vigorous, and then the fermentation's still going, but now your beer is dropped down to maybe 60 degrees internal, and you can have a hard time finishing up the last few gravity points when you're only at 60 degrees on a lot of those ale yeasts. So ideally, you want a temperature-controlled place to do this. They have glycol and stuff these days, but just an old freezer. You can buy a freezer on Craigslist for $50. Get one of those. You can buy a temp control thing for $20, $30. You can build one for like $10 these days, I think, even. Get one of those, and for under $75, you've now made your beer. You have complete control over your beers. You can either get the little inlet. I forgot the name of what those are on your fermenter, or you can just tape the probe to the side, and that does a pretty good job, to be honest. So ideally, say you take an English barley wine, you're making a 10% English barley wine. Maybe you want it 66 degrees primary fermentation temperature. So keep it at 66. Your fridge is going to go down into the 50s for a little bit to keep it at 66. Once a lot of the sugars have been eaten up by the yeast and the vigorous peak fermentation has subsided a bit, it'll probably be in the low to mid 60s in order to keep that 66 degree temperature. And then you check gravity after a few weeks, and maybe you need a few more points, and you bump it up to 68 or 70 just for that last few percentage points. And now you've fully fermented and attenuated your beer, and then you can cold crash it, get it down to 32 degrees, let it clear up, settle, bam, you've got yourself a well fermented big beer. And give it time. 3 to 4 weeks on the primary yeast is not a big deal. The earlier stuff I read was always talking about autosilus, the yeast. If you keep it on the yeast too long, you get off flavors from dead yeast. I think that's more of a concern for commercial breweries. I've heard because of the pressure of the bigger fermenters. I've had big beers on yeast for months in the primary before, just either forgetting about something or it didn't finish up and I've repitched, and I've never had off flavors from it. I'm a judge. I've hang out with plenty of people that are beer judges, BJCP judges, pro brewers that have great palates, and believe me, I've never had a beer that suffers from that flaw, and I've had beers on big yeast cakes for months. So I would not worry about 3, 4, 5 weeks in the primary for these big beers, and always take a final gravity. Do not package, remove, keg your beer until you know it is finished fermenting. That's burned me plenty of times. A beer tasted fine to me. Great, put it in the keg, or let's bottle it. I've had it happen with a few big Belgian beers before. You make a big dark strong or a quad, and it tastes great. It's been 3 weeks. Oh, beer should be done. I don't see any activity. All of a sudden you bottle it, and if you're bottling at the Belgian standard for high carbonation, I'm often 3.5, 4 volumes, and you have residual sugar in those in that beer. All of a sudden, your 3.5 to 4 volumes is going up even higher, and you've got explosive bottles. You pop a cork and it just blows up, and your beer's ruined because the yeast is just thrown throughout the whole beer. The half beer that you have left will be mostly just full of yeast. So don't make that mistake. It's a costly mistake that you don't want to make. Learn from my mistakes and others.
Yeah, those are really great tips. If you were to drink some big commercial beers, what kind of commercial beers do you like?
My favorite beers out there commercially right now. I mean, oh man, there's so many good beers right now. I go to a lot of beer fests. I go to the Rare Beers, Big Beers in Breckenridge. Rare Beers is Denver. Wellworks Invitational up in Greeley. Great American Beer Fest. There's just so many great beers right now. But I really like the Big Stouts from Side Project, their Derivation series. Couple of their beers in their Derivation series, which I think is on like 13 beers now, are just phenomenal. Corey King is the brewer there, and he did an awesome video tutorial over an hour on beerandbrewing.com recently. It's worth it. Sign up, free trial. I think it's like $10 or $20 a month. That's worth it too. And you just tells you all about how he makes his stouts. It's really recipe formulation for everything he does. I mean, he just tells you exactly how he does it, and it's awesome. So check that out. That's really inspirational because I love those beers. On that note, some of the other big stouts, Kane, New Jersey, I believe they're from. They're awesome. Bottle Logic in California, those guys make killer stuff. Fremont's always fun. Brew 3000 is really cool. Had that recently, big barrel-aged barley wine. I've had that a few times this year and really enjoyed it. Locally, Wellworks is great. Their Medianoche series is probably my favorite stouts in state. IPA-wise, I really like Outer Range is nice. They're up in Frisco. They're a lot of fun. Some of the East Coast IPAs are really fun as well. Treehouse, my friend Jeff used to go and work in Boston, and he'd bring back Trillium like every other week, so we drink a lot of Trillium. That stuff is good, but there's too many people making great IPAs these days. The New England stuff is fun when it's done well, and it doesn't have too much of that hop sweetness. When it has that really great flavor and a really soft mouthfeel, I really love some of those New England IPAs. Traditional, well, I shouldn't say traditional, but I should say non-New England IPAs, but I guess your take on sort of a modern West Coast, but not really that piney all the time. Comrade and Cannonball locally make amazing IPAs that I love to drink. Bierstadt Lager House is probably the place I go to most, just because they make phenomenal German-style beer. And they also have wrestling once a month, entertainment wrestling, like that WWE-style stuff from a local troupe. So it's cool to drink, sit there drinking liters of Helles while you're ringside watching people, do backflips off a top rope. It's pretty it's pretty hard to beat. Liberati's a cool place too. That's in North Denver as well, and they do the Un beers or whatever. I don't know how to say it properly, but beers that are also fermented with grape. They're still beers because they're at least 51% grain, but they ferment with different grapes, and it's really cool the stuff that they're doing. And they have good food there as well. But yeah, I don't know. Those are some of the places that come to mind when I think about what I really like. Blackberry Farms is one I really, really like as well. Some of my favorite saisons, stateside probably, Blackberry Farms. I think they mostly use the DuPont strain, or their house strain is similar to it, but they make really, really cool stouts, or really cool saisons in the same vein as DuPont, sort of. I love those farmhouse funky saisons. Speaking of funk, actual funk, sour breweries as well. Casey's always a good place in state to go for great sour beer.
Well, what is it you're currently brewing?
Well, not what I'm brewing now, but what I just brewed. I made an American amber and a Belgian blonde with my friend Nathan the other day, and then I separately at the same time made a pseudo lager. That's kind of referenced it earlier. It was a 2-row and sort of the American hops that you would probably use in a lager a lot of times, that I had on hand at least. Willamette and I think Vanguard is what I had. And then used USO5 and just been fermenting it in the mid-60s. So it'll be interesting to see how that comes out. It's not a lager. It's just going to be a light ale. It's probably more like a blonde ale, but I just wanted to see how clean that yeast might go at that temperature, and just keep it really simple and just see what kind of a beer I come up with. At the very least, it should be a nice drinkable light beer to have on tap at some point. I've got some stuff that's I'm going to put on the tap soon. A traditional German Pilsner that I made. I love Pilsners. I'm trying to make a beer similar to that Rathaus Pilsner, that Black Forest brewery in Germany. Their Pilsner's really nice, and it's not something I get locally. Locally, I drink Bierstadt Pilsner a lot, the slow pour Pilsner. It's a great Pilsner. Pivo Pils from Firestone is a hoppy Pilsner. I like that as well. But I can get those, so I don't really want to brew what I can get locally fresh. However, that Black Forest beer doesn't come over here that often, and it's like $15 a 6-pack. So I decided to try to really make a beer similar to that, and that's with the best Heidelberg, the lighter Pilsner malt, 10% Tettnanger and Hallertau hops, 3740 yeast, step mash, and low and slow lagering, 50 degrees for a couple weeks, and slowly lowering it down, and then 32 degrees for a few more weeks, and just really clean, really clear, really crisp, fully attenuated, nice, smooth beer. So that'll be tapped soon, and I can't wait because I really love a good Pilsner. English Pale is carbonating right now. It should be ready in a day or two. I made that with Andrew Voss. English Pale, except we used his hops. I forget which ones we used. It might have been I don't know if it was a Neo Mexicanus or not, but or it might have been Hallertau, I don't know. But it's an English Pale with his hops, and that I'm really curious to try that. And then I have a Maibach coming up also with Andrew Voss. We brewed in December. That I tried recently. We'll probably keg it in a week or two. It's tasting excellent, so I'm very excited for the Maibach. Next thing I'm going to brew is a English barley wine, a big, thick, chewy English barley wine. So we have an English barley wine that we put in a third use bourbon barrel that we have, and the bourbon barrel is still giving off plenty of wood and bourbon. It came from a local distillery. It's a 15-gallon, but third use. The first use we went 8 months. Second use we went about 8 months. So 16 months worth of beer in a 15-gallon barrel. Usually it's stripped out all that bourbon, but this distillery only puts their I shouldn't even call it bourbon, I guess, 'cause I don't think it's bourbon. It's just whiskey. They only put it in there for 8 months and then they turn it over. So it's really fast, and it means the barrel is super boozy. It's really good, but it's super boozy. So you can't put beer in there as long. In hindsight, I probably would have went a little less on the first use for the big stout, and then a lot less on the second use, which was like a Firestone Anniversary type blend of barley wines and quad and stouts as well. But the second use was way too boozy. So anyways, English barley wines in the third use, and the alcohol and the barrel it thinned it out too much. So it's a good beer, but the body's too thin. We didn't build a big enough beer for how much booze and oak was left in that barrel. So I want to make a big, thick English barley wine and then blend it with what's in that barrel, like 50-50. And I think that should get us to where we want to be with a beer that will be half barrel aged and half not, and it should have the right amount of body, the right amount of booze. So I do that a lot. I like blending things to taste. Even when using stuff like vanilla beans or coconut, or not really cacao nibs, because I've never really gone overboard on that. But if you're using vanilla beans, you can go overboard. Same with coconut. So I like splitting the batch in half a lot of times, doing it proactively. And then going ahead and just dousing the first half with the coconut or vanilla and being aggressive. Because if you overdo it, you can just blend back some of the base. And if you don't overdo it and you get a really good character, then you can do something else with the other half, or just keep the other half straight. So I really like blending. I wish I had more capacity, at a professional level. People have all sorts of barrels they can choose and taste and blend to, and that's really neat to me. I'm jealous in that way. On the homebrew scale, it's usually like, at most I'll have 2 barrels I can blend with, put different recipes into, several different recipes into one barrel, but usually don't have many to choose from. Speaking of blending, one other cool thing, my friend Brian has a wild ale, peach wild ale that is a little too acidic, but it tastes really nice. It has a lot of flavor. And I have some wild peach wine that it has some wild yeast in it, and it's not bad. It has a good peach flavor, but it's a little thin and it doesn't have the depth. So we were blending that last night, actually. He was over here and we were blending that. So we're going to combine those things, and I guess it'll technically be a wine because it looks like it'll be about 2 parts peach wine to 1 part of his peach beer. But we're going to go ahead and do that, and we might split half of it off and even put some like Tahitian vanilla beans, something a little lighter, and with the peach, kind of like a little vanilla peach thing going on for some of that beer. But I'm going to do that soon. I just got to order some vanilla beans, and that'll be the next project as well. So I think that's that's mostly what's been going on and what's in the pipeline. I'll probably make some more lagers as well, and due for a big stout pretty soon too.
I also know that you like to do other things than beer. Why don't you get into a bit of those other projects?
Yeah, other than beer, I do plenty of other things. I've made port wine for several years. I think my oldest vintage is 2017 for port wine. Made a few kits, and then with my friend Nathan, and then every year we buy grape juice from California, and now our third friend Justin's in on it, and we ferment it out and fortify it, and make port wine once a year that way. But I've made some stuff on my own. I like to forage ingredients, and cherries I've done, peaches, all sorts of different things I find locally. Last year wasn't a good year for fruit. I just got a bunch of choke cherries and different types of, I think just a couple different types of cherries, a couple choke cherry trees for cherry wine. But the year before there was tons of good stuff. So did a lot of that. I like port wine, so we do port wine, and it also ages pretty well. For the wine, I usually just either juice it or I freeze it. I used to juice it, and now I actually freeze the fruit for a couple days, take it out, thaw it, chop it up, throw it in the fermenter, and then I usually put boiling sugar water over it to kind of pasteurize it, to sanitize that wild yeast. And then I let it cool overnight, and then I pitch my yeast energizer and my wine yeast, and go through with a fermentation there to acidify it the different ways. There's different things you do along the way to dial it into where you want it. But that's how I'm making my port wine now for the most part. And then you fortify it. Either fortify it when it reaches a certain final gravity. So if you want it to end at like 1.035, you just fortify it then, or you fortify it and back sweeten it after. So you let it ferment all the way out, and say you get to say 14% alcohol. Great. Maybe you want it to be 18% for your port wine. So you add enough brandy or Everclear or vodka or some sort of mix of those into it to raise it to about 18%. And then you would add sugar to back sweeten it to whatever taste, usually between 1.03 and 1.05, depending on how sweet you want your port, and also what kind of fruit or what kind of grapes you're using. But the fruit stuff is really interesting. I've done all sorts of different ones, from strawberry to blackberry to mixed berries. Apple port was kind of cool. We've done some apple port. It's a little hot still. It's like 2 years old, but apple port is pretty cool. It's got some good flavors. So port wine is one thing I do. Ciders, again, good apple years. 2 years ago, a friend set me up with a group of people that had never really brewed anything, and they really wanted to make cider. They had a lot of experience, they're like farmers. One of them runs a CSA, a friend of mine, now a friend of mine who's introduced to me then. So my friend introduced me to them, and I'd made cider a few times, and he called me the cider expert, which was quite the oversell. So we picked, I think we had over 1,000 pounds of apples between like 20 people, 30 people, something like that. And we just had this big production, 2 full days of chopping apples and grinding them and pressing them and, preparing the cider. And a lot of it did not turn out very well because too much of the batch of apples we had were a little too green. They weren't ready yet. One of our friends was moving, and we needed to pick the apples sooner than we should have in hindsight. So there's a little bit too much of that like bitter green apple flavor in a lot of them. Some of them turned out great, but for the most part, the bulk of it was just average, okay cider. So next time we do that, we'll make sure to get super ripe apples. And we probably picked off of like 20 plus trees locally. It was a big ordeal. So you live and learn, and you get better, especially when you're new to things. Besides that, I have distilled stuff at friends' houses before. That's pretty fun. Nothing major. Made mead before as well. I do like mead. I wouldn't mind making a batch or two a year just to have some mead around every once in a while. But mead is really cool. I have not done sake, but it's something that I might be interested in. And then cheese is another thing that people do, cheese and kombucha, and those are two things that I would like to get into at some point in 2020.
Are there any other brewing resources out there for our listeners?
As far as homebrewing resources go, as I mentioned before earlier, beerandbrewing.com is great. The video series on making the big new style imperial stouts, the chocolate on chocolate, smooth, awesome stouts, thick stouts. Corey King from Side Project has the video on there behind their paywall. Definitely worth it. If you want to make good, authentic German lagers, Bill and Ashley did a series on, or did a video on there on telling you exactly how they make their awesome lagers from Bierstadt. So you can learn everything about making German lagers on there. If you want to make good New England juicy style IPAs, Neil Fisher from Wellworks, their fantastic Juicy Bits recipe and technique is on there as well. So that website is fantastic. It is probably now my favorite place for it, that kind of thing. For new brewing techniques and recipes, their podcast is great. Obviously, Jamie does an awesome job. And then their content on their website is great. I like the online, I like the forum-wise, I like the American Homebrewers Association website a little bit better than Homebrew Talk. I find that Homebrew Talk is great. It's big. There's a lot of good resources there, but I just consistently see people respond in an authoritative way with information that's just blatantly false. And that's the kind of stuff that if you're reading a forum and you're trying to learn, you need to be able to take someone's, if someone says they're certain of something, you need to be able to take their word. And when people are recommending all sorts of bad practices or just things that aren't going to work or just false, it just calls into question some of the content on the site. The American Homebrewers, I find that forum a lot more. There's some really visible people that know a lot on there that post on there. People like Gordon Strong or Denny Kahn. But also, the things that I do know that I can verify that I see posted there, I see that coming up a lot. So when I'm looking into new ideas, it's one of the forums that I'll go to. And I'm not going to necessarily base a new technique or an idea or advice off of just one single post or source, but that site would come into play pretty well. Besides that, Zymergy, the American Homebrewers Association magazine, is great. It's always been great. BYO's gotten a lot better over the years. I used to find a lot more issues, I would say, with BYO. A lot of errors I'd find, or just things that didn't seem like good advice in BYO. But BYO seems to be getting a lot better the last few years. So BYO isn't bad at all. Talking to your local brewers, if you like the beer that people make. Most brewers are very open about how they make things. Almost never do I can't tell you that, I don't want to tell you that. People are, in the brewing industry, people are like almost an open book. I'm sure people have their secrets and things they don't want to tell you about, but when you're asking them a question on the homebrew scale, they almost always will oblige. For me, back in the day, Matt Van Wyck, he was he was a local brewer at Flossmoor Station making awesome beer. And him and his assistant Andrew, they would be happy to share any recipe of any beer they made. I just ask, and they would give me the 7-barrel version, and I'd just break it down into a homebrew, and I could brew a similar beer to what they were making if I wanted to, which is awesome. It's so cool that those brewers were just so open about it. Really so passionate about their profession. But these days, same thing. You can email a brewery, even if it's not a local brewery, a brewery like email, and they'll often tell you things. You can get information off their website. I pieced together my Rathaus clone, the Pilsner clone, basically just from information online. I take the German brewing practices that I learned and then combine it with the recipe information and the gravity information that I already have, and then the water profile information that I could find online as well. So all that combined, and it's all there for you. Books, there's too many to name. There's so many good books out there. I probably have over 20 brewing books, and I consider them all. They're all great to reference for certain things. The series, the yeast, the water, the malt series, that's a great series. The ones I mentioned earlier are good. Dave Carpenter's lager book is fantastic. If you want to brew lagers, know about lagers, that book is a phenomenal resource. So go for that. I recently got a Dark Lagers book, the Thomas Weyermann Horst Dornbusch, I think is his name. Don't remember the pronunciation. But it's a dark lager book, and that is a fantastic book as well. It's all about dark lagers. Otherwise, I really like Gordon Strong's books, especially his second book, the Advanced Homebrewing or something like that. I really love the way Gordon Strong writes his recipes. He'll write you a recipe. He'll tell you a little bit about the beer. He'll give you the main stats of the beer, the IBUs, whatever, the SRM, the alcohol. Then he'll give you the grain bill and the hops. And then he tells you sort of like recipe variations. So if you decided to experiment a little bit, he might suggest switching a hop or adding a little bit more crystal malt or taking away crystal malt and adding some more dark malts or changing the base or adding a fruit. So it's pretty cool. You have a recipe, you have the story on it, you have all the parameters, and then he kind of gives you an idea of how you might want to vary it if you wanted to go in a different direction. And he also tells you about why he did it the way he did it, whether it was, he used Maris Otter because he had some extra Maris Otter on hand, or because he wanted, a certain, nutty note in the beer. But yeah, I found his recipes to be really reliable as well, and I've based plenty of beers that I've made on some of his recipes before. So that Gordon Strong Advanced Homebrewing book is great as well. But I think those are the main resources that I would recommend. There are some good breweries that have recipes out there that publish full recipes. Avery has them on their website. Brewdog's posted like every single recipe they've ever made. And actually one of the Big Imperial Stouts I made, one of the 20%ers I made, this one I made with my friend Mike, and we freeze distilled it. I shouldn't really call it distilling because it's not. Freeze concentrated the beer from roughly 13% to 20%. It was based on a Brewdog recipe called Tokyo, their Big Imperial Stout. It's a fairly simple malt bill, simple recipe. So we made a beer similar to that, and then freeze concentrated to about 20%, and it took gold in the experimental category at Big Beers. I think it's 2017 maybe. So that was pretty neat as well. But yeah, all sorts of resources out there. Bell's, I think, has a lot of their recipes out there as well. So especially these days, you're just not hurting on great resources. There's some great brewing blogs out there. The Mad Fermentation guy, Mike, was it Mike? His name is. He has a great blog. It's mostly a previous resource because now he has a professional brewery with Scott Janis, who also has an awesome blog of resources and a great book. If you want to mess, especially with hoppy IPA type beers, if you want to mess around with those beers, his book takes sort of a science data-driven approach to it. Brewlosophy.com is a great one as well. Brewlosophy for me is almost inspirational than anything else. Like, you just read experiments and ideas, and the comments are probably the most interesting comments on like any beer publication or beer website out there, because there's a lot of dedicated brewers that decide to reply to a lot of these experiments, and they talk about, maybe the experiment could have been better this way, or they ask questions, or they say, I've done something similar. So you get a lot of good discussion in those comments. So it's not just the experiments. And then they have a recipe section, which is cool. They have a podcast, which I haven't listened to yet, but podcast seems great as well. So that's a cool resource as well. But yeah, a lot of resources for the newer brewer, and you can learn about just about anything these days.
Well, Ryan, I'd like to thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about brewing big beers, and we'll have you back again some other time. I'd like to thank Ryan for coming on today's show. It was a really great conversation, and I learned a ton about brewing big beers. You can also find us on social media. We're on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Always look for us at Homebrewing DIY, all one word. Well, that's it for this week. We'll see you next week. on Homebrewing DIY.